Hi, everyone. Welcome to this hour's Thread Talks, our second segment of Thread Talks for the day. We're glad to have 3 additional presentations today during our Thread Talks, each about 15 minutes long. We're going to kick things off with Joan Berner today, and she is teaching us all about stretching your design skills. So take it away, Joan.
Hi.
Go ahead, Joan.
I am Joan Berner. I'm south of Asheville, North Carolina. I'm in Hendersonville, and I love about any type of fiber technique that there is. But my mind always goes back to clothing and designing clothing. So there are many key design features, not enough to cover, or too many to cover today. So I'm going to cover just 3 of them. But the way that I really end up stretching my design abilities is to enter something that gives me some parameters that I have to kind of step out of the box in order to accomplish. So there are 2 places I really enjoy doing that. One is every time convergence comes around, I do plan entries. It makes me look at a preconceived idea and how can I, with my design sense, fit something into that criteria. So I always do that. The other group I work with is the Asheville Community Theater, and they have a fashion show that is quite an experience to attend. And they have categories all set for you, but they're all really weird categories. And they sell out every year. They sell out their tickets at $75 a piece. And so it's really cool to be able to see people using their creativity and designing garments on such a wide scale that is so well represented in the community. So the 3 that I'm going to talk about today, the first one is theme. And whenever you start to design a garment, you should have some idea of where you're going in it and what you need to do. And Tim Gunn's probably my favorite person for this, and he always says, edit, edit, edit. And I think lots of times our instincts are, well, I've got to show everybody just what I can do. And that's not what designing a garment is all about. So you may decide your theme is a color scheme. It might be colors from a photo you took on vacation. It might be plants. It might be a type of technique that you've used, or it could convey a concept. So you want to start out with a place, where am I going? What am I going to do? And to begin to look at, okay, how can I build this concept in my garment that somebody else would understand it? One of the other things that I always try to look at in designing a garment is there is one center of attention in the garment plan. If you have too many, your eye just floats between all the concepts and doesn't land in a place where your eye can focus on the rest of the garment and the garment as a whole. So you've always got to try to get something that somebody looks all over the garment and then settles down, looks at the garment as a whole. So there should be one center of attention to your garment. And the other one I'm going to discuss are proportions. There are lots of well-known proportions that everybody uses. You know, the most common one is probably the Fibonacci series. So there are things that people have discovered over time, they've done studies on, that actually say, how does the eye see things and what makes it of most interest and appeal? So the other 2 things that I look at most likely when I start talking about proportion is that odd numbers are generally more interesting than even numbers, and uneven divisions are generally more interested than even divisions. And that's because when you have half and half, it's almost like 2 boxes, like right on top of each other, and they just look like 2 squares when they're half and half. So they're much more pleasing to the eye if you've got like 1/3, 2/3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some garments that I've done for the Asheville Community Theater, thinking that it might be something fun to take a look at instead of regular garments. And I'll go over how I've used each of these 3 design concepts in order to make an interesting garment. So there we go. So I'll start with this one here. One of the things I must always do too, if I'm making something where I really want my design to show, is I try to make a complete garment. So I generally have a headpiece of some kind, and this headpiece, because she's so clear, is kind of hard to see, but it's got the strainers on it that we'll talk about in a minute, but I generally make some kind of headpiece to go with the garment. So let's just, there we go. So if I start at the top, what was my theme? My theme was given to me. It had to be stuff made from the hardware store. And so I hope you can see the hardware pieces here. I used wire to crochet with, metal. We have lots of incidentals, little washers. I crocheted the wire down here too. So my theme was I had to create a garment that looked like a garment that could be worn, and I had to start with a theme. So the theme was hardware. And then my center of attention was obviously the belt. You know, this little thing twirled around, so it gave, when the model came out, she could play with it. And then my proportions to this garment were, I wanted to make sure that, first of all, she's like 1/3 and then 2/3 the length. And so it gave a better cutoff for her. And then I had a repeat of the design in 3 places. So I started with the strainer pieces, which would have been on her head, then come down to the bra area, and then come down to the skirt. So you could kind of keep moving through the garment, but when you were done, there was a place to settle your eye. So that was how I worked on that garment to incorporate those 3 ideas. The second one was actually, we had to pick an artist, and then we had to portray that artist in our design. So I picked Monet because I always liked his little dabs of color, and they were just always spoke to me. And of course, Monet did a lot of things with water and the colors that were associated with water. So in the end, I made hundreds of beads in here that are all crocheted into fishing lines so that it doesn't show. And then these were the little spots of color that I wanted to do to actually mimic what I thought Monet was so good at. And the center of this garment was actually, as she walked down the aisle, she'd twirl and the whole skirt would just flare out with the colors. So, and again, my proportions were 1/3 to 2/3. It goes all the way down. So I incorporated the 3 areas there. And again, I incorporated a piece on the top just to try to keep the color range flowing. In the last one, this had to be made out of unconventional materials. So that was my theme. I had to get unconventional materials. I used soda cans and I cut them apart and then curled them all together and then attached them one at a time to the garment. And so I had my 3, again, this was her little hat. So she has a hat that has the curls, and the chest that has the curls, and then down to the hem that has the curls. And maybe I can get, there's the curls at the bottom. So it was a way to keep your eye moving through the garment, but there was some continuity. Obviously the piece here that was the thing that would catch your eye, the center of attention, was the boa. And the boa is actually woven. It was just a small section down the center that was woven with all leftover yarns. And so for a model to walk down the runway and be effective, she was able to take the dark background of the runway, the dark background of her dress, and extend her expanse and the attention by being able to move her boa around. So these contain the 3 different themes that I talked about in the beginning. So the next time that you go to sit down and design something, think these ideas through, because the more planning you have, the better in the beginning, the more likely you are to meet it. I find it takes a lot of editing. There are things that I try in the beginning that I think are going to work and don't work. So if you can start with a concrete theme and a concrete idea to start with, you're going to be a lot better off. I keep a sketchbook. I put pictures in my sketchbook of things that I may want to remember to use later. But I try to take all these ideas and say, okay, what is it I want to make and what is my theme? So again, your theme can be color, it can be textures, it could be weave structures, but you need to settle on an idea. Otherwise, all these other ideas creep into it that you may come across as you begin to work on these. Create one center of attention, again, a place where the eye can rest and look at the piece as a whole. And it gives you a much better view of the overall piece. You don't want people to say, oh, there's a center of attention here, and then there's one here, and then there's one here. It's too confusing for the eye, and you really don't settle on the design of the garment and see what it's really all about. So you want to have a center of attention. And then again, you want to go ahead and have your appropriate proportions and rely on some of those things, you know, the golden rectangle, the Fibonacci series, and there's lots of reading out there to do on what proportions work the best. But for me, I'm often using the odd numbers and the 1/3 to 2/3 equation. So when we get to have convergence again in a couple years, I want you to go and try to make an entry, try to use some of these key concepts and stretch yourself from just saying, oh, well, I'm a good weaver and I always do this kind of weave structure and people know me for this weave structure and that's how it's going to look great. I want you to get a theme and follow your theme all the way through. Good designing.
Thank you, Joan. I have so many new ideas for my next project, so I just have to find the time to tackle them all.
That's what I was going to say. The time is the problem. Thank you.
Thank you again. Okay. Next up, we have Jennifer Angelo, and she's going to be giving us all the tips and techniques on wet felting. We're gonna.
This will stop sharing screen. Do you want to continue?
And then we're going to turn it on Jennifer. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, I'm about to share my, can you see me now?
Yes, we see you. So you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, thanks. So my name is Jennifer Angelo and I live in Madison, Wisconsin. And I just want to say what a great presentation that was. I'm all psyched to submit something too now to the convergence next year. What I thought I'd do, I have a PowerPoint because I wanted to show you some techniques and I was going to do it hands-on. I thought, oh, that's going to be way too hard. So I have a PowerPoint for you. So I'm going to share that. So I want to show 3 wet felting techniques. So what I'm going to do first, if I can get my screen to go to the next one. It worked before. There we go. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and how I got interested in felting, and then a very short history and the basics, and then the 3 techniques. Nuno, which is combining silk and wool, and pleated felt, and using a resist, which is a piece of plastic. So about me, my name's Jennifer Angelo, and several years ago, my husband got the dream job in New Zealand, and so we had to go because it was the dream job. So we sold the house, sold the car, packed up our daughter, and took our daughter and our dog and moved to the South Island in Dunedin, and he got this fabulous job at University of Otago. So I got my daughter enrolled in school, had to go buy her a school uniform. And then of course I had to look at all the shops because there were so many different shops that we don't have, and handcraft shops. They have so many more handcraft shops. So of course I had to make a beeline to all of those because I knit, I weave. I had to see what they were doing. I saw the most beautiful scarf I'd ever seen. It wasn't knitted, it wasn't woven, and I couldn't figure out what it was. So I asked the clerk, and she said, "It's felted." I thought, felt? So I hadn't seen felt since I was 7. When I was 7, we had a felt board, and then you had stiff felt people, and then you put them on the felt board and you'd move them around and tell a story. This was not that kind of felt at all. This was luxurious, cozy, drapable. It was beautiful, and it was too expensive, and sadly I did not get to buy it. So, but I thought, well, I have to learn how to do this. fortunately, the library was full of wet felting technique books, and of course there was YouTube, so I bookmarked all the felting YouTube videos. And another woman had just moved that I met, had just moved to Dunedin as well, and she wanted to learn too. So we got roving, we got yarn, we got materials, and every Monday we got our kids after school and we felted every Monday at her house. So that's how I started, and that was 12 years ago. We lived in Dunedin 5 years, and that was 12 years ago. Since that time, I've had many instruction from world-class teachers. So very short history on felting. Felting has been around since prehistoric time. It's been in Central Asia, it's Turkish rugs, Mongolian yurts, and Swedish slippers and mittens. So it's just been around forever in all different kinds of forms. So let's talk about the basics. So I mean, some of you may have some basic idea. You may have felted one or two things, or you may not at all. So this is roving, and this is where most felters start with their felt. So the sheep has been shorn, the wool has been washed and processed and dyed. And then it comes in this roving, which is like a loose rope. And this is pre-yarn. So this was how you would prepare wool if you're going to make it into yarn. So this is right before it's going to turn into yarn. So spinners will know about this. And then you take a piece of this, you take little wisps and you lay it out, and typically on bubble wrap. And typically you do like a pattern vertical and horizontal, and you lay that out. And then you get it wet with soapy water, and then you roll it up in a towel with plastic on the wool, and then you agitate it like pretty much forever. So that's the part where the little fibers, through the agitation and the being wet, will start to tangle and get themselves in a nice mess, and then they'll lock down and become a fabric. So unlike weaving that can unravel, and unlike knitting where you can lose a bunch of stitches, once felt is felt, it does not unravel. You can make a buttonhole in it and it won't unravel. So here are the techniques I wanted to talk about today, which you could use in that garment that you're going to make for convergence next year. Nuno. Nuno is a Japanese word meaning fabric, and Nuno is adding silk to the wool. So why would you want to do that? Well, there are several reasons, and this is particularly true for new felters. For experienced felters, not so much, but for new felters, it's really helpful. You use less wool. It's drapable. You can make summer weight scarves. It doesn't have to be heavy and thick. And you don't have, what really appealed to me when I was a new felter, because the layout, getting a flat and even layout is really hard. It was hard for me. And so you might have a hole, like, oh, I didn't want a hole there. Now you call them accents, but if you don't want that there, then it's a problem. So the silk helps to kind of even everything out, and you don't have any holes. So that's one reason to use it. Now, silk will not felt to itself, but it will felt to the wool, because as you're agitating it, the little fibers in the wool will grab onto the silk and hold on, and making it one fabric. It migrates through. So the kinds of silks that you might use are gauze, and I don't have a picture of gauze here, and habitai. Habitai is the one at the bottom that's a plain color. For me, it's white. A friend of mine who I practiced this with said it was pink. So the bottom one is a habitai, and typically felters use a 3 mummy or a 5 mummy, and what that means is how close the fibers are woven together. You don't want something that's woven tight, because then it's harder for the little wool fibers to penetrate and get through the silk. The blue and green one are margolin silk. Felters love this silk because it has a really wide weave, really easy to use, and the shimmer is just exquisite. So people use that for the bottom layer, or sometimes for accents on the top of the wool. And then I put this one with the green print, the green leaves on it, because sometimes you'll find a silk that, oh, I just like it the way it is, and I just want to make a garment or scarf out of it. And so then you'll just leave the print as it is. Other times you like that design element, and you might cut it out and make your own design on a garment. So that's why I put that piece in here. And cotton. I'm not that familiar with cotton, but I know a wide a wide weave cotton works quite well. And then hand painted silk. I've just begun to learn how to hand paint, and this is one I hand painted thinking that I would use it to felt it, and now it's sitting in my studio and I'm thinking, well, do I just want to hem it up and leave it as it is, or do I want to felt it? So I'm kind of deciding about that. So here are 3 examples of Nuno techniques. So, and these are all wraps, and I made all of these. So the first one is, I just had the purple around the neck is the silk, and it's a kind of a gauzy silk, a crepe. And then I laid it out on my felting table, and then I had a Malabrigo roving, and it was already variegated. And so I just laid that out on top, and of course I had to add fringe. And so that was a very simple design, made a lovely wrap, and was very simple. I also want to talk, and then the next one, the green one, the 2 green ones, have pre-felts. Pre-felts are felt that's not finished, but it is holding together rather nicely. You make pre-felts when you can make a circle out of roving, but it's going to be fuzzy. It's not going to have clean, sharp edges. So you make a pre-felt when you want clean, sharp edges. So in this case, and then you put that on the silk or however you want to do it. So in this case, I made yardage of white pre-felt wool, and then I cut it up and dyed half of it light green, half of it kind of a medium green, and then also the gauze background silk is, I dyed that green as well, as you can see. And then I cut them in rectangles and made my design. And then these little flowers, little abstract flowers, also have their silk, they're a pre-felt with silk on top, and then so I can make these little abstract flowers. The last one I call my football game day wrap. And what I did here is the green, the dark green is wool, and I just laid that all over my my felting table. And then I had pieces of the green silk and the orange and the yellow, and then those rectangles of silk, and I laid them on top in the stripe pattern, and then I finished my felting. So those are some ideas of how to use Nuno felting. I wanted to talk a little bit more about pre-felts, and so you can make distinct circles, which I love polka dots. Polka dots is a theme in my work, and so I cut out. Obviously, I made some white yardage and then dyed some light blue, medium, dark blue, and green and yellow. Cut out the circles, and then I was playing around with the design, and I just wanted to give another little sharp little technique that you may already know about. If you don't, I take pictures of my design of how I might do it, and then on the edit phase in your camera, in your phone, you can get a little black pencil, and then with my finger I draw lines of where I want to put another design. And that's because I like to accent my pieces with sumi ink. Sumi ink is very permanent, so I don't want to put it on my scarf until I've decided exactly what I want to do. So if this way I can to practice all I want to and get the design I want. And here's the finished scarf. So the one that won, the pattern that won, was the squares that kind of go down the diagonal. So let's talk about pleated felt. This is a new technique to me. I'm just in love with it. It's bouncy, it's alive, it's gorgeously soft, it's just wonderful. So in this technique, you make a rectangle of felt that's obviously larger than the finished piece, the size of the finished piece, and then it's pretty much done. You felt it until it's a pretty much finished, done piece, and then you wrap it on a PVC pipe. And indulge me, this is a after picture, and it should be a before picture, so just pretend this is white and hasn't been dyed yet. So you put it on a PVC pipe, and then you do a shibori wrap. So you wrap 5 times, and then you push the felt together, you accordion pleat it until it's as tight as you can get it, 5 more times, put it together until you've done the whole thing. And then you get your dye bath ready. You don't have to dye it if you don't want to, but you do have to boil it for about an hour. So you get your dye bath ready, your boiling water, and you put it in, and you leave it for about an hour. And then you take it out, let it dry completely, and then you unwrap it. And that's pleated felt. And so you can make cowls, bracelets, necklaces, and a little bit longer, little choker necklaces with this. That's all I know so far with this technique. And then there's a resist. A resist is a piece of plastic or cardboard. So this is very important when you're when the thing you're making is 3D. So you need a hole in it. But how do you get a hole in it if you're just making a flat piece of felt? Well, you get a piece. This is underfloor laminating, and this is what I like the best to use because it's very durable and you can use it again. So again, as I didn't say before, as we all know, wool shrinks, and so it's very important to you have to start out with your piece being approximately 1/3 bigger than your finished piece. And so this was the size resist I used for making this little vessel. So you lay out your pattern in about 3 layers of horizontal and vertical, and then you get it wet, flip it over, do the same thing to the other side, and then roll it up and felt it. And then as the wool shrinks and begins to curl the resist, then your resist is impeding your process and not helping it. So you cut the hole where you want the hole to be, take the resist out, and continue felting. So I just wanted to give a couple of examples. And this is a baby jacket that I made for a very dear family friend. So the green is going to be the background and the orange and yellow will be the accent colors. So here the pattern is almost completely laid out. I've got one more sleeve to do, and then I'm going to get it wet, massage it a little bit, flip it over, do the same thing through the other side, and then I'll begin the felting process. And of course I couldn't resist making a pre-felt, so I made little duck pre-felts for this particular project. And here's the finished project, the front and the back. I thought it was really cute, and it'll be an heirloom for this family. And then I wanted to mention, I can never get it through my head of the beginning piece has to be so much bigger than the final piece, and it surprises me every time and I do measurements extensively to make sure I've got the right size, that how much bigger your beginning piece has to be because it's going to shrink down. So, and then I have one more piece I wanted to show you. So this is the dress for me, and you can see the armholes and the neck. And then I put a line down the middle because it was so big, it was kind of disorienting. So I put that there just to keep me oriented of what I was doing. And here's the first layer. This layer is just a first layer. It's not enough to make for this side to be done. This particular dress had several layers of wool and silk in it, and so this is just to give you an idea of the first layer. And it's just gigantic, but it always shrinks down. And the finished piece, I was quite pleased with that piece. So just to review, we've looked at Nuno, combining wool and silk. We've looked at pleated felt, and we've looked at using a resist. Thanks so much for your attention. I appreciate the time you took to listen.
Thank you, Jennifer. What a wonderful presentation on wet felting. I especially loved the resist and the pleating techniques. And who knew?
Who knew?
Who knew it shrunk that much? It looked big, and then it got some really small.
I know.
Okay, now we're going to turn it over to Anu, who is going to be sharing with us some educational practices and theories in designing weaving instruction. Let's bring her up here. We're going to spotlight you. There you go. You're live and ready. Hi.
I'm trying to share my screen. So,
okay.
Can you see me?
Yes, we can see you. We don't see your screen.
Oh, you don't see my screen?
No, we just see you on camera.
Oh.
So you should be able to go to share screen and select the screen you want to come up.
Okay.
Let's see. There it goes. It's coming in.
Is it on
yes.
now?
Okay, we see it now. We see your PowerPoint.
Hello, my name is Anu. What beautiful presentation Joan and Jennifer gave. Mine is going to be a little theoretical because I come from an education background. I am a weaver. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I have a training to become a teacher to teach textiles, but I chose to go into weaving. But it always stayed with me, the practices that we can use in designing our classes, craft classes, if it is weaving or It can be spinning or knitting, whatever. But we can apply those theories and practices that the teachers use in classroom in our teaching. I'm just gonna share some tips with you here. This came about, these things became important to me when I was working at the local yarn store, and I see a lot of people, knitters and weavers would come, they'll start a project, but won't finish it. They would just abandon their looms and leave their weavings and just go away or never come back, and we would be finishing their projects later on. So it made me wonder why in heavens, I mean, somebody would spend so much time dressing up the loom and just leave it. There could be some problems there or issues in our teaching, or it is on their side. What did we not do? So when I started my own studio in 2016, I was thinking about these theories that teachers use in the classroom, which is a formal setting. There is a curriculum teachers teach, and there is an assessment in the end to assess what pieces are learned. But in our informal setting, if it is a studio or it is a shop where you are teaching these crafts, how can we apply these theories? So that always stayed with me, and I wanted to incorporate those pieces in my teaching when I started my studio. So if you Google the learning theories and classroom teaching, a lot of models just popped on the screen. Big terms, a lot of wisdoms, behaviorism, constructivism, and others. A lot of teachers use different types of models when they design their curriculum. For me, I chose the Addie model, which starts with analysis, design and development, implementation, and evaluation. That seemed like a perfect thing when I was designing classes for my students. In a classroom setting, they define instruction design as practice of creating instructional experiences. And I underline the main words here: instructional experiences to help facilitate learning effectively. So there has to be an experience because it's a craft. It has to be hands-on. But how can we transfer knowledge from instructor to the learner within a very informal setting effectively? So that was a goal for me when I was designing my own classes. Also, I wanted to integrate theory, knowledge, research, and practice as teachers do. There is some theory behind an idea or a concept, or in this case, weaving. The knowledge, people who have done, there's a lot of knowledge around us, different types of weave structures, the fibers, type of looms, all those come into picture when you're teaching weaving. So you need to do some research and the practice. So this is the whole idea that I wanted to transfer into my teaching to make a successful experience for the learners or the students I would get in my classrooms. So it always stayed with me, and I wanted to kind of bring it to my teaching when I started my studio in 2016. So I just want to share now the how of this theory that we learn in classrooms and the teachers apply all the time when they are designing their curriculum and assessments for their students. How can I apply this in a very, very informal setting, teaching weaving or spinning or any kind of art or craft? These can be applied, and I wanted to do that in my teaching. So I use the Addie model, which starts with analysis. Normally when I don't advertise, it's just word of mouth. Someone hears that I'm teaching, they call me. And before we embark any kind of weaving or any teaching, we meet over a cup of tea or coffee at my studio. I try to find out about them as much as they are trying to find out about me, what I do. And it's always a wonderful experience when they walk into my studio, they look at my pieces and they want to know if they can make it and how hard it is. I mean, that's a tricky question, I always feel. even when I was working at the yarn store, people would say how hard it is. And my answer was always, it depends. Depends on what? Depends on the motivation you bring and the knowledge I have. If I have that knowledge, I can share with you, but you need to be motivated, and how hard you make those things for yourself. That'll tell us in the end how hard the project was, how much time it takes. So I'm pretty sure all the weavers and crafters have come across that situation when someone comes to you and says how hard it is and how can I make this. So I want to learn about them, and they want to learn about me. They want to learn about the loom. So I take them to around my studio and show them different kind of looms, different projects that they can do. Also, their learning goals. I remember I became a teacher by accident. In 2016, a friend of mine was ready to give me her loom. I suggested to her that let me teach you weaving. You can try this loom and then we'll take it from there. And I asked her, what do you want to make? And she said, I wanted to make kitchen towels. Well, I researched what yarn she can use, 8-2 unmercerized cotton, a project about 14 inches wide, the smallest I could do on that loom. They were still about 350 warp ends. My God, I mean, her head spun because when I told her to measure 350 warp ends, that's a no. That's a no. So we left that project for later, and I gave her a project which had about 100 warp ends, worsted weight yarn, 8 den reeds. So we started very simplistic way, and that gave me an idea that the first class has to be about the loom, not about the project. So this is a new machine that they are learning about how to use it. No matter how much they want to do, the first project normally is about the loom, learning to operate that machine. That requires a lot of steps to get it ready to be able to do. Also, I want to know if they have any special needs or requirements, their time availability, if they are working, how much time they can spend. We all know weaving is a very time consuming thing, and it requires a bunch of time, especially in the beginning when you are dressing up the loom in the correct way, and you are measuring the warp, and you can't rush those things. So I try to talk to them about their time availability, how we can work it out, or any other health issues, back issues. Kind of these analysis give us a picture what they want to do and how we can achieve the goals of the learner. So this is an important step in analyzing and kind of working out the weaving experiences of the learner. From there, actually, I take them, I design a class for them, sometimes individualistically, what yarn they can use. One of my students doesn't like to touch any silk. She tries to, because she knows that they kill the silkworms. So she decided not to use silk in any of her weaving. So I have to kind of take her through in like using cotton, and wool is okay with her. So I need to know in advance what they want to do so I can give them yarn choices. Also, very big thing here is it has to be level appropriate. If they have previous weaving knowledge or weaving experience, we can build upon what they have learned before, right, with me or somebody else. So it's very important to learn what they know prior to coming to my studio, so I can base my project on that. And it's always a good idea to build upon like a building blocks as teachers do in class, one level, and then using that knowledge, they take them to the next level. This is always a good idea because it reinforces the base. Warping is something they don't learn or remember all the steps with one project. It's a repetitive learning, so they need to do it over and over again to reinforce that idea. Also, the terms we use in weaving are not like a everyday terms. They don't know what the reed means. They don't know what the set means, especially for beginners. So it's always a good idea to give them in smaller chunks. If you give them all in one go, they get overwhelmed and they don't grasp anything. So I try to give them in small doses, small components, so they remember it and grasp it better, especially for adult learners. It is important because they cannot move on with the next step until they grasp the first one. So I try to make it worth their time, that they get what we are learning in that particular session, they take it with them and they think about it. I give them handouts to go over that as they go. Also, there's a need to set up the goals and expectations from both ends. From my point of view, as well as the viewer's point of view, what their goals are and what expectations we can keep per session and per project. There's no formal assessment. We don't do any testing, but there is a finished project that is coming out of the loom later. And we need to set some parameters, some boundaries, so it becomes a really fun experience for them to be able to take home with them. So like in the first beginner class, I normally ask them, tell them that by the end of the class, they should be able to open a magazine, be it a hand woven or little looms, and they would be able to decipher what's written on the pages or project at a glance. Even they can read it. And when we start a next project, they can have their input in designing the project. So those are some of the goals we set for ourselves as a teacher and as the learner. Also, the other thing that is important about the project is the pace of the project. How you want to give them in smaller chunks rather than giving them the whole thing at one go. I suggest taking it in like smaller chunks so they can grasp that knowledge before moving on to the next step. It always helps them. So when they come to the class after a discussion, and I let them touch the yarn, I let them just feel the loom and discover the loom, how it feels to them, and sit on the loom. If I have a project on the loom, I let them weave a little bit before we start any weaving. It's a hands-on craft, so you can't just learn by theory. Here I would like to add, I should have disclosed this in the beginning. I learned all my textile knowledge I gained in India, the theory part, but I never touched a loom. That was in late 80s when I did my undergrad and master's in India with focus on textile. But I never got to touch a loom. It was until 2014 I got to touch a loom and learn. So theoretically, you can grasp all the concept, but unless you do it, you don't get it. So that stayed with me. So the first lesson is measuring the warp, discussing the project again, and checking out numbers, counting the heddles. We do it as a rule in my classes. We count the heddles twice, if not 3 times. To make sure we have enough heddles, and if we make a mistake, we know exactly where we made the mistake and we can correct it. The operation of the loom and warping comes in the next class. Even if we have time, we stop at measuring the yarn and then start with threading the reed and heddles in the next class, so that they can look back and grasp that piece that we just did finished in the class. So that it stays with them for a little bit longer until they start their next project. I always tell my students that in weaving, 60% or more of the time they spend warping and setting up the loom, and rest of the time they do weaving. So this is a big chunk of the class which they should pay more attention. If they make a mistake, It's some of the mistakes are hard to correct, but most of the mistakes we can check and correct ourselves. So we have to pay attention to these smaller steps that happen while we are dressing up the loom, and you cannot just take it easy there. So, and I take pride in my when I warp my loom, I dress up my loom. It's fun. Not everybody thinks the same way. A lot of time my students come back to me, it's like, I can't believe you say you love threading your the loom, and the warping the loom is my favorite part. And it is my favorite part of the project. Weaving is taking it slow, enjoying every minute, every step. So I enjoy my projects doing that way, and I try to impart that notion with my students. I share with them my mistakes more so than the projects I have published in Handwoven or Little Looms, because there are many mistakes that I have made. Every mistake actually in the book. I broke my thread in my first project, and but I learned something new, and it stayed with me. So I always tell my students to learn from your mistakes. So don't hesitate if to start a project or going wrong, because most of it we can correct. Also, I instill the value of good practices. I have learned from best of the weavers, and all of that I share with them. There is no right or wrong way to do it. It should work for them, as long as the result is fine. So we talk about our mistakes a lot in my classes over tea and laugh over it, and kind of try to make it a fun experience for everybody. When the project finishes, they take it home. I try to make it a fun for them. We sit down again and talk with each other, and they give me a good feedback or a bad feedback. I take it because it helps me back to design more classes, and I incorporate those in future classes, how I can build better classes, how I can teach better. And that's a big motivation that keeps me going. And there the circle completes, and we are back to the new class, a new project, and a new beginning, with the ending of one project, starting of the next, and the circle completes. Due to the pandemic, I don't have my students in my studio, which I miss terribly, but I use this time to learn new techniques. So when they come back, I have so many tricks, new tricks in my toolbox to share with them, more charged up, more excited, more energetic to begin our classes again. But this is what I do, and thank you for this opportunity to share with all of you what I have been doing, my work, my classes, my curriculum using classroom theories and practice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anu. We really enjoyed your presentation on educational practices. And thank you to everyone for joining us today in our first day of Spinning and Weaving Week. And please join us again tomorrow, kicking off at 11:30 a.m. with Marketplace Live featuring Cochineal Design Studios. See everyone there and have a good night.